I never imagined that inheriting a piece of land from my grandfather would pull me into the strangest chapter of my life. To most people, it was just a quiet, overgrown lot at the edge of a wealthy neighborhood. But to me, it carried roots of memory. As a boy, I had run through the field, caught fireflies on humid summer nights, and listened to my grandfather's stories while sitting on an old stump that had been there for as long as anyone could remember. When my grandfather passed, he left me that parcel of land along with a small box of his letters and photographs. At first, I didn't think much about the land. I had my own house several towns away and no plans to move. It was just a piece of property that one day, maybe I'd sell if I needed the money. But something in me kept me from letting it go. My grandfather always said land was the one thing nobody could make more of, and if you had it, you ought to respect it. I didn't realize that the neighborhood bordering that land had its own politics, driven by an HOA that prided itself on maintaining standards. Their homes were large, polished, with driveways lined with imported stone and lawns cut to military precision. At the head of this little empire was a woman named Margaret Cole, though everyone just called her Madge. She was the type of person who wore power like perfume, walking into rooms expecting people to part like the Red Sea. I didn't know much about her until one afternoon when I drove out to the land to check on it. The old path I remembered was gone, swallowed up by manicured hedges. To my surprise, there were construction trucks and workmen milling around. I pulled over, thinking maybe the town had started some project without notifying me. But as I walked closer, I realized they weren't building a road or a park. They were laying the foundation for what looked like a mansion. "Excuse me," I said to a man unloading rebar from a truck. "What's going on here?" He glanced at me, sweat dripping from under his hard hat. "Villa project. $6 million build. HOA president's dream home. You must be new around here." I felt my stomach twist. "This is private property." He shrugged. "Talk to the boss." So I did. A few minutes later, I was introduced to Margaret herself. She was in her mid-60s, sharp gray bob, big sunglasses, and a silk scarf that looked absurdly out of place among bulldozers and cement mixers. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be the grandson," she said, almost tasting the word. "Yes, I've heard the land was in your family, but it was abandoned for so long. I'm sure you don't mind it being put to better use." "Better use?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice even. "This is my land. My grandfather left it to me." She tilted her head, like she was humoring a child. "I understand your sentimentality, but you see, the HOA had a vision. A villa here elevates the entire community. Property values go up, everyone benefits. And frankly, young man, you don't look like the type who was going to develop it anyway." I stood there, stunned. She was casually brushing me aside, as if I were some nuisance, not the rightful owner. "Are you saying you started building without even checking ownership?" I asked. "Oh, we did check," she said smoothly. "Paperwork gets messy, old titles, forgotten taxes, these things happen. But don't worry, you'll be compensated. Generously, I might add. It's really best for everyone if you just let this play out." I should have called a lawyer right then and there. But something in me wanted to see how far she'd go. My grandfather used to tell me, "Never wrestle with a pig. You'll both get dirty, but the pig likes it." Madge was that pig. If I rushed in, she'd spin it, fight it, bury me in legal tricks. But if I waited, she'd hang herself with her arrogance. So I let her talk. I let her build. I drove past every few weeks, watching as the skeleton of a villa rose higher, marble columns hauled in from out of state, fountains shaped like Roman gods, and terraces overlooking what used to be my grandfather's wild field. Neighbors whispered in awe about the house. It was going to be the crown jewel of the neighborhood, and Madge basked in it, strutting around the site like a queen. But what she didn't know was that I had quietly gone to the county office and pulled every deed, every tax record, every scrap of documentation. The land was still mine. Taxes had been paid by me. The title was clean. Her vision had no legal foundation at all. Still, I said nothing. Watching the walls rise was like watching a slow play unfold. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing the ending while the lead actress had no clue she was headed for disaster. Months passed. The villa neared completion. 6 bedrooms, marble floors, a wine cellar, a home theater, even a guest house out back. By the time the landscaping crew rolled in, the place looked like something out of a luxury magazine. It must have cost every penny of $6 million, maybe more. One evening, I parked nearby and just sat in my truck, staring at it. The sun was setting behind the massive house, and the fountain in front was already running, sending water glittering into the orange light. I remembered my grandfather telling me about the Great Depression, how he nearly lost that land, but worked 3 jobs to keep it. He said the land was his anchor, the one thing no one could take. I felt him with me in that moment, whispering, "Hold steady, your time will come." The neighborhood gathered for an unveiling party once construction was finished. White tents, champagne, string quartets. Madge had spared no expense. I wasn't invited, of course, but I watched from the street. She gave a little speech about community pride, how this house was the pinnacle of HOA vision, and people clapped politely. That night, I sat down at my desk with all my paperwork and wrote a single letter. It wasn't angry or dramatic, just a formal notice of ownership with proof attached, addressed to Margaret Cole and the HOA board. I sent copies to the county and my lawyer as well. Then I went to bed, slept like a baby, and waited for the storm. The storm came quicker than I expected. 3 days after I mailed the letter, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "This is Margaret Cole," she said, her tone clipped and icy. "I received your so-called notice. I assume this is some kind of joke." "It's no joke," I replied calmly. "That land is mine. Always has been. I paid the taxes, I hold the deed. Your villa is sitting on my property." There was a pause, the sound of her breathing fast through her nose. "Do you have any idea the magnitude of what you're saying? Do you know how much has been invested?" "I do," I said. "Roughly $6 million. But you didn't ask permission. You didn't even ask a question. You just built on land that wasn't yours." Her voice trembled with fury. "This is extortion. You're trying to take advantage of me, of this community. We will fight this." "You're welcome to try," I told her. "But the law is on my side. You knew what you were doing. You gambled. You lost." She hung up without another word. The following week, a letter arrived from her attorney, full of legal jargon and threats about adverse possession, community benefit, and unjust enrichment. I read it twice, chuckled, and slid it into a folder. My lawyer, an old friend of my father's, reviewed it and simply said, "They don't have a leg to stand on. She's grasping at straws." "Don't worry." Still, Madge didn't back down. She began a campaign, calling me names at HOA meetings, telling neighbors I was a greedy opportunist trying to rob her of her dream home. She painted herself as a victim, a woman who had poured her heart and soul into building a residence that would uplift everyone. Some of the homeowners bought her story. Others kept quiet, too nervous to cross her. But the truth has a way of cutting through noise. County officials sent confirmation notices that the land was mine. The HOA board, after consulting their own counsel, realized they couldn't shield her. One by one, the walls of denial she built started crumbling. I remember the day she showed up at my doorstep. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with rain clouds. I opened the door to find her standing there, scarf pulled tight around her shoulders, her makeup streaked slightly from sweat or tears. I couldn't tell. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I let her in. She perched stiffly on the edge of my couch, gripping her handbag like it was a lifeline. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at the floor. Then finally, "You win. I can't fight this anymore. But please, I'm begging you, don't take the house from me. I'll pay you rent. I'll pay you whatever you ask. Just let me keep it." I studied her. This woman who had carried herself like royalty, now deflated before me. Part of me felt pity. Another part remembered her smirk the first time we met, when she dismissed my inheritance as nothing more than sentimentality. "You built a palace on someone else's soil," I said slowly. "You knew better." Her eyes flicked up to mine, desperate. "I thought I could make it work. I thought you were just some man who didn't care. I was wrong. But if you take it all, I'll be ruined." I didn't answer right away. I thought about my grandfather, about how fiercely he had protected that land, even when he had almost nothing. I thought about all the work he did just to make sure it stayed in the family. And here was this woman asking me to hand it back to her after she'd stolen it. You should have thought about that before you poured $6 million into a villa that wasn't yours to build, I said finally. This isn't about ruining you. It's about respect for my family, for the law, for the land itself. You didn't have any. She started to cry, then, softly at first, then harder. But her tears didn't move me. They felt like part of her performance, one last act in a drama where she still believed she could control the script. The next weeks were chaos for her. She tried every trick, appeals, petitions, even showing up at county meetings to rally sympathy. None of it worked. My lawyer filed the necessary claims, and within months, ownership of the villa was legally transferred to me. The neighbors were stunned. Some whispered that I was ruthless. Others said it was poetic justice. When I finally walked through the villa for the first time as its rightful owner, it was surreal. The marble floors gleamed under my shoes. The chandeliers sparkled like crystal rain, and the scent of fresh paint lingered in the air. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it also felt hollow, like a monument to someone else's arrogance. I stood on the balcony overlooking the neighborhood, the evening sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I thought about how my grandfather would have reacted. He would have shaken his head, maybe laughed at the absurdity. Then he would have told me to learn from it, to remember that pride always comes before a fall. That night, I didn't sleep much. I walked the empty halls, hearing my footsteps echo. The villa was mine, yet I felt no joy. Instead, I felt a heavy weight of choices of what to do next. Keeping it meant inheriting her enemies, her bitterness, her mistakes. Selling it would bring money, but money had never been the point. I realized something then. This wasn't just about a house or land. It was about legacy. My grandfather hadn't fought for that land, so it could become a gilded cage for someone else's vanity. He had kept it so his family would always have a place to stand, a place that was theirs no matter what. And now, it was my turn to decide what that meant. Owning that villa felt less like a victory and more like holding someone else's crown. Every time I drove up the long driveway and saw the fountains dancing in the sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't belong to me. Not because the law said otherwise, but because it wasn't built with honesty. It was a house born out of arrogance, not love. Still, I moved in for a while. I wanted to understand what I had inherited, not just in brick and stone, but in consequence. Neighbors passed by slowly in their cars, some waving politely, others staring as if they couldn't decide whether to congratulate me or condemn me. A few brave souls stopped to chat. One older gentleman, Mr. Daniels, leaned on his cane at the end of my driveway one morning. "Quite a house you've got here," he said, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I never thought I'd see the day Margaret lost." "Neither did she," I replied. He chuckled. "She ruled this neighborhood like a queen. Told folks what color to paint their shutters. Fined people for parking too close to the curb. You asked me, this was long overdue. Maybe now things will settle down." I nodded, but his words stuck with me. Power had made her reckless, blind to her own overreach. And now I stood where she once stood, holding keys to a kingdom I never wanted. Inside, the house felt like a museum, grand but lifeless. I wandered the halls at night, hearing echoes of a dream that wasn't mine. I thought of selling it, of wiping my hands clean and walking away with a tidy profit. $6 million could buy a lot of comfort, after all. But then I'd remember my grandfather's voice, the way he spoke about land, not as currency, but as a thread in the fabric of family. One evening, as I sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip behind the trees, I opened the small box of letters my grandfather had left me. I hadn't read them all before. Grief had kept me from diving too deep. But now I felt ready. In one letter, he wrote, "This land may not look like much to others, but it is proof that a man can stand against time, against hardship, and still hold something of his own. Promise me you'll never let anyone take it lightly." I read that line over and over, the words sinking into me like roots. He hadn't asked me to make it rich or grand or famous, just to respect it. That was the turning point. I knew then what I had to do. I called my lawyer and asked him to draft papers, not to sell the villa, but to transform it. Over the next year, I poured my energy not into living like a king, but into reshaping the property into something meaningful. The wine cellar became a library, filled with my grandfather's books and journals. The grand ballroom was converted into a community hall where neighbors could gather without fear of fines or scoldings. The guest house out back, I turned into a shelter for veterans in transition, something my grandfather, a veteran himself, would have been proud of. Word spread quickly. People who once avoided me began stopping by, offering help, donating furniture, bringing food for the shelter. For the first time, the house felt alive. Laughter echoed through its halls. Children played in the gardens. The fountain, once a symbol of Margaret's vanity, became a place where folks sat and shared stories on summer evenings. As for Margaret, she moved away quietly. Rumor had it she tried to sue me again, but her cases went nowhere. Eventually, she sold her old house in the neighborhood and disappeared from sight. I didn't celebrate her fall. By then, I'd realized her greatest punishment wasn't losing the villa. It was watching it thrive without her. One afternoon, about 2 years after the dust had settled, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in delicate script. Inside was a short note, unsigned but clearly hers. You took everything from me, yet you gave it back to the community. Perhaps you are better suited to that land than I ever was. I hope one day you'll understand that I only wanted to be remembered. I just chose the wrong way. I sat with that letter for a long time. For all her faults, Margaret had been human, flawed, proud, desperate to matter. And in some strange way, I did understand. Legacy drives people to make choices, some noble, some foolish. As the years passed, the villa became less of a monument to arrogance and more of a living testament to resilience. I often gave talks in the community hall, sharing the story of how it all came to be. I didn't gloat. I didn't dwell on Margaret's downfall. Instead, I told people about my grandfather, about what land and legacy really mean. The lesson I shared was simple. Don't build on what isn't yours. Not just land, but trust, relationships, respect. When you do, no matter how grand your walls, they will eventually crumble. But if you honor what's been given to you, even the humblest ground can grow into something lasting. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now came to me for advice, not about property disputes, but about life. One widower told me that after hearing my story, he finally forgave his late brother for a long feud over inheritance. Another woman said it inspired her to pass down her family farm to her daughter instead of selling it to developers. That's when I knew the villa had finally found its purpose. It wasn't about marble floors or fountains. It was about people coming together, learning, healing, and carrying forward something bigger than themselves. Sometimes I walk the grounds at dusk, the way I used to as a boy with my grandfather. The gardens are different now, landscaped and orderly, but the spirit of the land is the same. I can almost hear his voice, steady and warm. Hold steady. Your time will come. And it did. Not because I fought for riches or revenge or recognition, but because I listened, because I waited, because I understood that what you inherit is more than a deed or a dollar amount. It's a responsibility. Margaret built a $6 million villa to prove she mattered. In the end, her legacy was a cautionary tale. Mine, I hope, is something gentler. That patience can outlast arrogance, that truth can outshine pride, and that sometimes the best victories are the ones that leave you humble. I don't live in a villa anymore. After 10 years, I handed it over to a foundation that runs it as a cultural center. I moved back into my modest house, closer to family. But I still visit. I still sit on the old balcony sometimes, looking out over the neighborhood, remembering how this story began with nothing more than a quiet piece of inherited land and a woman who thought she could take it. The land is still mine in spirit, and it always will be. And when I'm gone, it will still be standing, carrying the weight of lessons learned and stories told. That, I think, is the kind of wealth my grandfather always believed in, the kind that can't be stolen, only honored.